Okay. That voice is always so daunting. I feel like I'm under interrogation, but
A little bit.
fine. Okay. Welcome everybody to our next coffee and conversation. I am here with Macy Keith, and I will let her introduce herself in just a second. But as a reminder, I am Felicia Gallegos. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Outreach and Prevention Coordinator from the SAAVI office, which is the Sexual Assault and Anti-Violence Information Office, and we provide advocacy and therapy to survivors within the USU community. And I am hosting this series just to provide a space for us to have conversations beyond the usual training conversations that we are all part of at some point along our Utah State journey. And the virtual world has really allowed us to be able to have the space where we can sip on our coffee or tea or whatever you have. Last time Courtney had water. I was like, well, that's exciting. But it is good for you. And just have a casual conversation. So with that, I will let Macy go ahead and introduce herself. Um, yeah.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Macy. I use any pronouns, so you can refer to me as she, he, they, whatever you like. And I am the Gender and Sexuality Program Coordinator in the Inclusion Center. And my dog wants to be introduced as well, but we will maybe later. Every time I start talking, he's like, "Whoa, I want to be in on
My
this."
turn.
So if you hear him, that's he's wanting attention. Yep. Yeah, so I work in the Inclusion Center and I do all things LGBT. So I do education, such as like LGBT 101s. I run the allies seminars. I run support groups. I do advocacy for students. I kind of do a lot. So yeah, I am happy to be here and have this. I love these conversations. This is what I do in my job, but also in real life all the time. So I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. Speaking of real life, what introduce yourself a little bit. One of my favorite things about this series and getting able to talk to some of the staff and faculty that are part of Utah State is humanizing us because we're not just faculty and staff, we're actually humans. So, what's a little bit about you outside of your professional role as well?
Yeah, what do I say?
TBD,
Um,
what is it?
what is my life outside of work? Just kidding. Well, I've lived here in Logan for 10 years. I hail from southern Utah and Arizona, so I'm a real big desert baby. So while my background right now is the beach, because I've been really wanting to go to the beach, I actually like it would probably be more accurate to say my favorite place is like my red desert, as I call it. Um, I have two beautiful fur babies. One is this dog that just wants all the attention right now, and I have a cat. I've been married for like half a year now. I
Exciting.
got married back in September.
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, yeah. We were engaged for a really long
I
time,
remember when you got
and
engaged.
yeah, like 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's
What a
been
perfect
fun.
time. COVID, lockdown.
I know. I was gonna have this big ball of a wedding because I can be a diva like that, and had to do a little backyard wedding with just the immediate family. So I couldn't even have like my in-law, like my sister-in-laws and their kids. It was just basically like
Right.
my siblings, my parents, his parents, maybe like a few friends. But it was perfect. It was honestly a really wonderful wedding. So
I love that.
uh yeah, I mean,
So
and other than
exciting.
that, I'm a huge crafter. I love crafting right now. My space is super messy because I'm toying with making jewelry and rings, and just finished a historical costume because I decided I wanted to. So
Because you
yeah,
can.
yeah, pretty much.
I love that.
Mhm.
Oh, 10 years. I was just thinking like that seems like so long. And then I think that I'm about there. Next year will be 10 years.
Yeah,
Macy
it
and I have
flies
been here,
by.
have both been at Utah State we go way back to when we were in residence life.
RAs together.
Yes.
Yes. And Kayleen said to show off something. Well, okay, so I'll show it really quick. Because my dream is to own a wildly successful Etsy shop, which will probably never happen because I'm too lazy. But I'm making these cute little, they're little
Cute.
globe things. And so this one has dirt from Moab. It has a little turquoise and a lava rock in there. And then this one is a little tiny sea star, whatever they're called, and shell.
Starfish.
So yeah, starfish. So star. Anyways, so
Star works. I honestly like that better. Wait, so do you buy those as necklaces?
Yeah, I just have a bunch of leftover stuff, so I was just playing around, and that's what I did. So
I want to see your rings. I'm obsessed with rings.
Oh yeah. I don't have many because most of them are drying, but I've been playing around with little tiles on these little things. So they're like little glass tiles. Anyways, that's what I do.
Oh, there's Macy.
Yeah.
Outside of her professional role. I love it.
Yeah.
And what are you drinking?
I'm drinking a honey green tea in one of my beautiful teacups. Another fun fact, I love tea things, so teacups and teapots. I love them.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I remember you saying that in a meeting, and every time I see a teapot now, I'm like, I wonder if Macy has that teapot, or that Macy knows exactly what kind of teapot that is. And I literally think that. Okay, wonderful. Well, thanks for being willing to humanize yourself for everyone.
Yeah.
I think it's not only helpful, it's helpful in so many ways for staff and faculty to humanize themselves. It's helpful for students to then come talk to us because they're like, oh, you're just like me. And B, given the fact that we talk about in our work some serious issues and have to have serious conversations, it's just nice to know a little bit about someone when you have to have those conversations rather than just being lectured at from a stranger or just even having the conversation with a stranger. So
I totally agree.
Yeah, I just had to start the conversations that way. But now we're going to dive right into the nitty-gritty conversations and questions that I have for you. So we're going to start. I just have some general gender and sexuality questions for you. And then as we get going, we'll talk a little bit more about SAAVI overlapping questions. So relationship, violence, different things like that. So, but to start, let's just start very basic. What does the acronym LGBTQIA+ stand for?
Yes, so the alphabet soup, as we like to call it, or the alphabet mafia is a thing that I found out on Twitter, or not on Twitter, TikTok. TikTok's the new one.
Yeah.
It's a term it stands for those 6 letters, but there's actually a lot more to it. And it stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, questioning, intersex, asexual, agender, plus, which means there's so much more. And this is, some people I know get really what is this acronym? And it gets kind of scary, I guess you could all say. And you're right, it's a lot of letters and it's weird. So people can shorten it to LGBT. But the longer one, the LGBTQIA+ is considered more inclusive in a lot of at least higher education circles. And then we also, sometimes you'll just hear queer as the big umbrella term. Because queer can both engender the sexual orientation identities, such as lesbian, gay, bisexual, but also all of the different trans identities. And so sometimes we use that as well. And you'll hear me interchangeably say queer or LGBT. So.
Okay. Is there ever a space where you shouldn't use one or the other?
Yeah, so we do within the community. queer is kind of a very questionable word because it has been used as a derogatory word for so long, and it's just being reclaimed this last generation almost, I want to say. And so I usually like to give a word of caution to those who are using it. If you're not sure how to use that word, I would be wary of it. Maybe not use it at all and go instead with LGBTQIA or gender and sexuality. But yeah, it's just something to be careful about because some people within the community are okay with it and others are still, there's some hurt and pain that is still associated to that.
Right.
And so, and there's lots of other reasons too, but we want to just be careful with that word. And I always like to throw that out there, but it's being reclaimed. Yes.
I do love that it's being reclaimed.
I do as well. I use it as kind of that broad term, but I also use it for my own identity. I like to just say I'm queer because I don't want to go into the specifics of like the different ways I identify. And so it's really awesome that we can have this word that is very all encompassing, but also can break down to be inclusive and say like, yeah, it's this one word, but there's so much under there.
Right. Right. It's similar to like survivor underneath like sexual violence. Like I'm a survivor. Like,
yeah.
Okay. So then my next question for you, and this is like a loaded question. So bear with me, and take your time responding. What is the difference between sex, gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, and any other identity characteristics that I'm forgetting about?
Yeah, I actually have this thing. I wonder, let me see if I can share. I wonder if I can put it as my background. Hold on. So yes, when we're talking about the queer community, it breaks down into these things. And whenever I go into my one-on-one, this is what I use. And let me just really quickly, I want to see if I can make him my background. I didn't like that. Oh, I should have done this before.
I like talking and the pictures in the background.
I know. All right. Like again, point. Okay, whatever. It's fine. We're gonna do this. I'm going for it. So, anyways, I have this wonderful little thing called the gender elephant, and some people may be familiar with it, or be familiar with the gender unicorn. Look.
Cute.
See, he's backwards, but that's okay. We'll just, oh, wait.
No, he's forward for me. He
Look,
was
I'm
back.
back.
You're upside down. You're upside down.
Oh, goodness. Okay. So we have this gender elephant and it breaks down all of the things for us, which you can't see the bottom one, but that's fine. So, or the top one. So if we were to look at all of these different things, we want to start with sex assigned at birth, which is right here, right? Am I doing it? There you go. So our sex assigned at birth, I like to think of as our bodies. It is our physical, biological makeup of a body, right? So we usually think of as male or female. However, science is awesome and cool. And we're finding that this is very, very different. And it breaks down even further, which is why the gender elephant now has kind of a spectrum. This is because we're all made up of different levels, hormones and chromosomes and all of these different cool things. So even now we're realizing that we're not so much in these boxes, and that's where we start, is our sex or sex assigned at birth is what we think, and it's usually male or female. Now this is going to be different than our gender identity. So our gender identity is that innermost feeling of being man, woman, both, neither, gender queer, gender agender, like there's so much more, and we usually think about it in these kind of spectrums. And I'll keep this with a grain of salt because when we're talking about this and when we're going off of true queer theory, this is not at all what it looks like. You want to think of like a beautiful vast universe or paint splattered in a room and it's little droplets in the air and everywhere is so messy. And that's kind of how it is to be a human, right? But this is a nice way to get it down and to really more streamlined way of thinking about it. And so our gender is that innermost feeling. So this comes from our ways of defining gender. It comes from the way we're socialized to think of gender. And it's really cool, but this is where we get that. And you can think about these spectrums if it's easier for you. Then we get our gender expression. And this is how I like to think about it is we as humans like to gender everything because that's how our brain works. We want to be able to spot somebody and know exactly what we're getting ourselves into, right? That is in our mannerisms, in our clothing, but this expression we usually think of as more feminine and masculine. And that can be related to your gender identity, or it can be even something completely opposite. It could be something very different. So yes, this is how we're expressing ourselves in a gendered way. And it could be related to our gender, or it's just who we are. Does that make sense? I don't know.
Yeah.
And then finally, we get to our attraction, which is down here at the bottom. And we have our physically attracted to. And if you could see below it, we also have romantically attracted to. And this is who we love. So it's those romantic or sexual feelings that we have for others. And it can be based on gender identity of that other person, or it could be based off of who their personality traits are and all of those things. And then I also like to say that there are sexual attractions where we're like, that person has a really nice bum. Or there is the romantic, or what I like to think of as like emotional attraction, which I like to compare to like the way that we're attracted to our friends. There's an attraction there, and it's mostly emotional connection because we get along really well, we have similar interests, whatever that is. And so we like to delineate those two to be encompassing of those people who may not have those sexual feelings or may not have the romantic feelings, So yeah, that is our gender elephant.
I love that. I haven't seen the elephant yet before.
Yeah, my partner actually is taking a queer ed class for their master's, and I discovered the elephant through there, and I was using the unicorn, and I was like, that's awesome. And the only difference is that sex assigned at birth part, because before it was just like little check boxes, and then they changed it to be that spectrum, which I like love.
Yeah. Which actually kind of leads to my next question, which is about, we hear these characteristics, all of them have been described as being a spectrum, and at other times are described as being boxes. So what is there a better way, and by better, I mean like more inclusive, understanding way to talk about both gender and sexual orientation, like all of the categories? What's better? What's best? What do we do?
That is a hard question to ask, because whenever I approach that question, because you're right, it isn't the best to think about as boxes or in spectrums. Like boxes would be the basic level, right? When we're checking off the boxes and our brains kind of work like that. And the spectrums are a little bit better. But I like to think of where are you at in understanding queerness, because queerness can be real confusing. It's all over the place. It's nothing like it's definitely against the quote unquote norm. It's nothing like we're used to, right? But it's the reality of who we are as people, because we're all very complicated. Right. And so I've heard a lot of different analogies that can be used to get away from the boxes and the spectrums idea. And what, like I kind of mentioned it beforehand, but there's been like the idea of like a universe, like a gender universe, and there's all these different stars and like all of that. And for me, I like to think of it more as like a color palette, and that's probably like the artist in me, where like I attribute different colors to different identity things, and then like we as people become together in this beautiful little painting, and we have all of these different colors, and maybe some other people have similar colors in their paintings, and that's how I like to think about it, so that we can start getting away from this idea of spectrums or boxes, but thinking of, we have these little, I think my cat just knocked something over, we have these more inclusive ways of looking at things, where it's like, yeah, I have this yellow piece of my identity, and then I have a little bit of this pink and a little bit of this purple, and you may have a little bit of blue and green and maybe a little yellow. And so we start seeing these similarities, but it's more encompassing. And that's probably a confusing way to think about it, but that's what makes sense to me.
No, I haven't heard that analogy before. Oh, my dog's growling now. But the animals. I love the like universe, both the universe and like the color palette. Like I particularly not relate, will relate, but also just think that that's such a good explanation because it is just you are who you are, and that just seems so much. I hate the idea of like fitting in a box or and then like the spectrum was like a little bit better because it was like a little bit of movement, but it's still like a line that you're living on. And it was, but like the universe idea or like this color palette idea is like you're there. You're there and you are who you are, and it is what it is, whether it's a mess or together, it doesn't matter. You just are there. Um, and so I like that analogy. But why do you think people struggle so much with getting past the boxes? Like getting past that box mentality. Even I would, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I would say even individuals who are within the community or are trying to do, I'm not even necessarily talking about those that are, you know, anti queer, anti LGBT, or I'm talking about those that are even trying to do the work to be more inclusive and or are maybe even struggling with their own identity. Those individuals that are struggling with those boxes and getting out of that box or even spectrum mentality, what do you think it is? And this is like a very big question, but that gets us so stuck there in that thought of like I have to be in a box. Or does that make sense? The question I'm asking.
Yeah, it really does. Hold on 2 seconds because my partner is also on a Zoom call and is really loud, and my dog opened the door. So hold on.
Okay,
Think about that.
we will all just sit and ponder why we are stuck in boxes and look at the beautiful beach that Macy has left for us.
Awesome. It also gave me a second to be like, how am I going to answer this question? So
Throwing bombs, truth bombs.
yeah, right. It's fine. There's the chaos happening in my house. As per usual. So when we're thinking about this question of why people have a hard time with it, I think it's because many different reasons. And I could be completely wrong, but I even reflect on my own experience growing up. So I didn't come out to myself until I was like 19 or 20. And before that, like I was very in this precarious situation where I think about like I wasn't sure if I was pro LGBT or when I was trying to because I had so many friends, but also I had like a religious influence that was saying no, it's not okay, and then and like my parents and like all of these different things, right? And so I usually try to borrow from that mentality. And I think what I see from my own experience and others is it's hard to understand, and so because we can't necessarily do a nice clear definition of things, it's scary, and people might not have like a fear response. It's more of like, well, that can't be true because that doesn't make sense to me. And that's one way of thinking about it. And I think also because we are socialized to believe that this is the way things are, and whether that's from our family, our society, religion, friends, all of these things, right? They kind of help influence what is right or wrong. And a lot of people look at LGBT and queerness and these identities as not fitting in the way things work or the way things are supposed to work. So then it can't, why why is that not true? I don't even know how I'm wording this and kind of going off topic, but I think it comes from like, it doesn't necessarily fit in that person's paradigm sometimes. Yeah. So it comes from that paradigm. And also, like, if you haven't ever struggled with your own sexual orientation or your gender identity, it's sometimes hard to be like, people do go through that, right? You're like, well, no, I just knew that I was attracted to men and I'm a woman. And so that's how everybody's experience is. And so sometimes it's hard for people to be like, well, I never had to think about that or go through that. So why do you have to, So
Right.
I don't know. I think it's different for everybody that I've come across of why it's hard sometimes. And it's hard for people to accept ambiguity and accept not fully understanding something and just saying, I do not know what your experience is and what that is like to question your gender or your sexual orientation or to identify in a different way. And therefore, I don't know how to validate that experience. So, and that's where I find a lot of people as well, where they're like, I can't comprehend that. So how do I, how can I just be like, oh yeah, okay, cool. That is your experience. That sounds like it's hard, or that sounds really cool. Like a lot of people struggle with that.
Yeah. I think, and I wanted to see, let's see, Kayleen mentioned something. Kayleen brought up the Netflix musical movie Prom. Have you seen it?
Not yet. It's on my list.
I know. I need to watch it too. But the movie revolves around a lesbian high schooler being discriminated and ostracized from their community. One of the arguments was that it is part of their religious beliefs and values. There's this one song that highlights love thy neighbor, and it just is how we want to pick and choose our beliefs and such. Oh, well, now it's like moved to the top of my list. I will definitely have to watch that. Thanks for bringing that to my attention. Yeah.
I've been binging another show, but that might have to now be what I watch tonight.
Yeah. No, it's interesting,
But yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just saying like that Caitlin brings up a really good point, is that religious argument. Oh, sorry, excuse me. Where it's not natural, a lot of people say, because you were born to be your sex assigned at birth, and that is your gender. And it's because God wants you to procreate, and you can only procreate with someone of the opposite sex, and therefore that's like, so like it honestly, that logically makes sense to me too. I can totally see where that comes from. I'm like, yeah, like the parts fit together and produce a way of furthering our society. But then, there's also the other side of things where there's like, well, this has been happening since the dawn of humanity. Like, being queer is a thing. And yes, you may not have heard of it because we don't have great records of it, but it has. And there's lots of instances that we're finding more and more. I love that that's a fact that's happening in history. Actually, a lot of historians are uncovering a lot of LGBT history, and it's like a new emphasis. I'm like, yes, I love it. But yes, the religious arguments do really play a huge part, especially with where we live. Yeah. Anyways.
Yeah. No, and I think just expanding on that, it's not just like religion plays a huge factor, but not just religion, but there's just so many boxes that we learn to fit within from the moment we're born, right? And those come from our parents learning boxes that they were supposed to fit in, and that comes from their parents telling them what boxes. And I really feel fortunate to be part of, and I mean, previous generations could have been like this, and maybe I'm just like pro millennial so much, but I really feel like our generation has been like, but what if we just like flatten the box and just kind of like live? And like maybe we don't have to fit in the box. Like maybe we can be in the box and also like be in a bunch of boxes. And I don't know. It's just I feel like it's been a fear-based thing of living in boxes. Like it's a protective mechanism almost of just like I know if I live in this box that this is what's going to happen. But now I feel like we're in a time where people are like, you know what? I'm over a box. I'm going to be who I am. And we're able to be and live more authentic lives. And it's actually, we're seeing positive outcomes. And so then it's like, okay, well, then I'm getting rid of my box. And hopefully everybody starts getting rid of boxes. Anyways, I could go on and on about this, but let's move on to the next question. Let's talk about pronouns. All of the things. What are they? How do we ask someone their pronouns? What do we do if we call someone by the wrong pronouns? Just pronouns seem like a new thing. Are they a new thing? What is going on?
Awesome. No, I love this question because this is a question I'm getting all the time lately. And I think it's awesome that we're having this conversation because I think it's a way of like opening the box. Saying, okay, I want to visually put you in this box and maybe I'm correct and maybe I'm not, kind of a thing. And so it's a really good way to be like, I'm gonna put this box aside and I'm gonna ask you what that is. So with pronouns, it is a way to refer to somebody. And we usually think about pronouns in a very gendered way. So that our pronouns are he, she, they. There's also lots of neo pronouns. I was at a conference a little while ago where their pronouns were pers, like short for person. There's lots of really cool ones out there that a lot of people use. But I'm not going to go into those. We'll just focus on the basic ones for now. Because people are like, wait, what? There's more. It's usually how that conversation goes, like, okay, calm down. It's okay.
Remember the universe analogy, everybody.
Yes, remember.
There's more.
Anyway, so it's a way to refer to another person. And I like to think about it as a way of it's a way of doing a micro support of validating that person and who they are, because they've stated these are the pronouns that I use, and when you use those pronouns, it's saying I see you, I'm validating your experience, hurrah,
Mm-hmm.
So pronouns, that's there. And a way to simply introduce yourselves is say so when we're using pronouns, there's a couple ways we can do this. So there's ways like in our Zoom call, right? Like I put the pronouns down in the corner and I have to put them in every single time because I have no idea how to get it to do that every time. I'll figure that out later. Go in and switch all the things. But there's ways to kind of signal it in that sort of way so you kind of can avoid that conversation, but I don't think avoiding the conversation really helps. So usually it's like, hi, I'm Macy, I use any pronouns, or I use they them pronouns. And it's just a way to be like, these are my pronouns. And you don't even necessarily have to ask because sometimes people may not want to give you their pronouns in that space because that would out themselves. And so they could just give you the wrong pronouns if that feels icky. And so sometimes it's just being like, hi, I'm Macy. These are my pronouns. You are. Have them introduce themselves. And if they want to add their pronouns, they can. But you should never ever force someone, really, I think, to be like, oh, what should I refer to you? Like, what pronouns should I use to refer to you as? Like, you can ask that question, but I usually like to just open the door and just say, you're welcome to share your pronouns with me or not. And if I don't know their pronouns, I usually always like to use they them pronouns because it's the most neutral way of going. It's not making an assumption of a feminine or a masculine kind of thing. It's just kind of being like, I'm going to be neutral until I know otherwise. Now, when you do find out someone's pronouns, they tell you when they're introducing themselves, you see it in an email signature, someone, whatever. It is important to just use that pronoun from then on, right? So don't use any other pronouns for them if you can help it. Maybe also ask them if it's like a one-on-one setting, being like, oh, these are your pronouns. Would you feel comfortable with me using that with everyone? Like, also understand the situation. So like, for example, I have a family member, a sibling of mine came out to me a couple of years ago, and they're like, my pronouns are he. he, him. And I was like, okay, that's awesome. I will refer to you as he, him, but do you want me to use that in front of the rest of our family? And they're like, well, not right now. I haven't come out to them yet. And so when I was around the other family, like I used they, them as much as possible. So I didn't have to use the she, her pronouns because he hated that. So we like had that conversation of what would be the most appropriate. And now that he's come out, everyone still uses the wrong pronouns because my family is still learning. But at least I can use those right pronouns when I can. And so having that conversation can be very helpful. And I was going to say something else, and then I just totally. Oh, when you mess up pronouns. That's right. I was like, what was the other part of that question? So this doesn't have to be a huge deal, but you need to know that when you do mess up, it's a big deal to some people. I'll say that. But you don't have to be like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And like that just feels awkward. And that now forces that person to be like, no, it's fine. Let me comfort you for messing up my pronouns.
Yeah.
Let's avoid that conversation. Let's avoid that emotional labor, as we like to say. So when you do mess up, so let's say I'm talking about Felicia and I'm like, Felicia, he is sorry, she's really a cool person, And so you just have to take a minute to just be like, sorry, say your apology really quickly, use the correct pronoun and move forward. And that's all it really takes. Yeah. And that in itself, just being even correcting yourself is a huge thing. It's awesome.
Right. Awesome. Thank you for that. And I think hopefully a lot of people watch this and understand that. I did get one time a comment, if somebody tells you, I'll ask you this before I tell you how I responded. But because I can be sassy in my training sometimes. But if I got the question, and I'll ask it here just in case anybody else is feeling the same way, who watches this. But if you personally don't believe in pronouns that differ from your biological sex, that somebody should not have a different identity or a gender. But somebody who tells you that to you, maybe they look like they're female, but they say that their pronouns are he, him. But so it goes against your personal beliefs to call them he, him, but they want you to. What do you do? Do you have to call them he, him? Again, this is not my personal question.
No, 100%. You need to, because it's not your business. Like you may have and this is my sassiness coming out where like,
because I was sassy too.
Yeah. Well, I think about it like, and to bring religion back into it, like, would you tell someone that their religion is wrong because you personally don't believe in their religion? No, you wouldn't, because we all understand that religion is a personal thing. At least I hope you do. And it's different, but you wouldn't like blatantly be like, oh no. You would respect that. You'd be like, okay, that is your belief. This is my belief.
Right.
And whatever you want to do. And when it comes to pronouns, it's not your business, as I like to say. I know that's a really mean way of saying that, but like, just use the pronouns they ask you to. It's a basic, honestly, it comes down to respect. If I ask someone, hey, could you use my middle name instead? Most people will be like, yeah, that's fine. I'll just use your middle name. It's your name. Same thing with pronouns, same things with the names that trans individuals or anybody chooses to go by. It's a respect thing. And it's not your business to know how they got there, why they're using that pronoun, any of those things. I think it comes down to, is your value to respect others? I hope so. So let's respect the pronouns and the names that they give us.
That's essentially what I said. I was like, do you consider yourself a respectful human being? That's the question you have to ask yourself. If you do, then you would be someone who would respect someone's pronouns. And that's the next question.
It's a really great way. And I think that's important.
Yeah, I provided space for dialogue, but it really is. It's just about like, it's so interesting to me how someone else's identity becomes such a personal attack on someone else. It's
Yeah.
so interesting. I mean, if I think complexly, I can in some ways understand that perspective, but at the end of the day, I really can't. Like at the end of the day, I really can't understand how someone's else's identity can hurt you or disrespect you to such an extent that it causes you to disrespect them. I
Yeah.
just I can't understand that.
Well, it goes down into that paradigm, I think, of what people believe, what is right or wrong, and how people act upon that. But then I also always like to I like to turn that conversation around and say, well, let's go back to our values, like that you mentioned, is my value to be a respectful, loving human. Well, that also encompasses validating someone's experience. You aren't walking in that person's shoes. You may not be able to understand what it's like to be there, but we can we can validate and respect those in those kind of very small ways. And people tell us that all the time, right? They're saying, this is my name, these are my pronouns, please use them.
Right.
Awesome, I can do that, even though I have zero understanding of why I'm using these names and pronouns, maybe. And you're
Yeah.
like, but we can easily do that. And yeah, it's hard to make that switch sometimes, but there's ways that we can practice. We can sit there and envision that person in our head and just practice the name and pronouns over and over and over. We can help correct ourselves. There's a
Oh,
lot.
I am so glad it's becoming more normalized for individuals to share their pronouns.
Me
And
too.
I'm on a hiring process right now, and just the amount of individuals who have started putting their pronouns on their resumes,
Yeah.
and I'm like, that is so incredible. But it also like makes my heart break thinking about all the individuals who in the past have like had to have applied for jobs and like just their identity has been assumed based off like the name, and then they show up and to an in-person interview and maybe they don't identify as who the interview panel thought they were, and that might change the like I don't know, it just like had me spiraling and in empathy. It's just like I am just so glad that we're moving forward, and that
Yeah.
sharing pronouns is becoming such a more normalized thing. um Okay, so we're running out of time. My goodness, we could sit here and talk forever.
That's true.
Um, but let's transition just for the last little bit. Let's talk about some things with SAAVI specifically. So, what are I'm looking at the questions that I sent you to think about what I want to ask. Um, so I think that unfortunately, we still live in a time where, straight, cisgendered, heterosexual relationships are the most socially acceptable. Um, and so, what unique barriers help us all be in the shoes of individuals who don't fit within that dynamic of a relationship, whether it's their gender identities are different or their sexual orientation or a combination of it all. Help us be in the shoes of those individuals and just understand. We'll never understand that experience fully, but just help those who are watching this get an idea of maybe what it's like to live in a world where your relationship just isn't as accepted. Does that make
Oh
sense?
yeah. Yes, it does. Well, I wanted to tackle this question from a broad point, and then maybe I'll share a personal story or two. But from a broad perspective, we even look at with when we're talking about SAAVI, and I've done the trainings with you, we talk about like um, the assumptions made of these relationships, right? Where they think, well, if it's two people of the same gender, then the power balance is going to be equal. So you can't be abused. That's
Mhm,
not true. We actually see that abusive relationships happen at the same frequency as they do in cis hetero couples,
mhm,
right? And so that is something to keep in mind, that the maybe the troubles or the issues that a person is having in their relationship, a heterosexual relationship, those who are LGBT also have those same struggles. We all fight about the dishes and we all fight about not fight maybe, but like we have to have these conversations with our partners about being validated, being seen and listened to, and all of those things. So that is one assumption that I always like to kind of broadly throw out there, is that these relationships, when it comes to just a relationship in general, that they're very similar all around. We all have the same kind of experiences there, but there are a lot of differences as well. So you do have to consider like how people have to navigate these relationships. Are they out to their family and friends? Are they having to lie and saying, oh, this is just my roommate? Are they going through a gender transition and their partner who previously identified as gay is now going, well, my partner is identifying as a woman, so what does that make me? And that's a whole huge dynamic that can happen. And so there's lots of these other things that come along with queer identities and whatnot that do add these extra barriers, especially when we're looking at sexual violence too. So if they are out to their families, or if they're not out to their families, can they go to their families and say, hey, I've been in this relationship and I've been abused, but I haven't told you because surprise, I'm gay. Like that's a whole thing. Are they going to lose that support network right when they really need it? And so there's a lot there. But then also when we're thinking about just going out into the wider world, I do believe that it's getting better, but it also depends on where you're at. So I'll share this story of when so I went on this cruise with some friends of mine, and one of the couples was two women, and we went on this wine tour. They got a little tipsy and they were just kind of cuddling up on each other and kissing and being really cute to each other, as like any couple would. And we were sitting on the bus waiting to go. I think for everybody else, I can't remember, we were sitting on the bus, not a lot of people in the bus, and this woman a couple of rows behind us started like saying a lot of rude things very loudly to her companion, such as, oh, that's so disgusting, I can't believe that's happening. And it's just one of those things where like they weren't doing anything super inappropriate. They were cuddling, kind of kissing on each other a little bit, like I've seen happily newlywed couples do this, like I was. And so it's one of those kind of things where like we do get in those situations as an LGBT couple that like people want to share their thoughts out loud, or they verbally come up and tell them, and that makes that situation really unsafe. So I've had a lot of couples even here in Cache Valley who are like, oh, I don't hold my partner's hand out in public because we get looks, we get comments, those kind of things. And thankfully that's mostly what we get here, because people are very passive here. But in other places, there's been lots of different reports of being harassed, stalked, all of these terrible things. So that's a thing that I usually challenge people to think of is think of that person you're in a relationship with, or someday will be, or whatever that looks like. And what would it be like to get really dirty looks when you're in the grocery store holding hands? Or what would it be like if people were whispering very loudly enough for you to hear that they did not feel okay with what you were doing? Like, and kind of flip that narrative. And it kind of helps say this could be a potentiality, not saying that it does happen all the time, but that is something that you can't really express your love the way that you would if you have that freedom to, or not. And I've had people be like, well, I'm not a big fan of PDA and I don't really post about my relationship on social media. I'm like, that's good for you. That's how you are. There's plenty of queer people that also are like that. But think of those who want to share that and be happy and blah, blah, blah. So there's just some constraints about safety, and whether that's emotional or physical safety, right? That happens within these relationships. And I'm kind of rambling at this point, but
well, and I think that, we talk about the outside influence on the relationship, but I think, you mentioned this, but it's important to note just the um internal factors that can happen too within the relationship, right? Because as an individual who is trying to live their most authentic self, depending on where you're at in that journey, you may be struggling with that. You may still have internalized homophobia for yourself, or you may just not really know your identity yet because you haven't felt the freedom to really jump into that universe, right? You still are like kind of on the spectrum, or maybe even still in a box, but just like peeking out, right? So it's like not only are you as an individual figuring it out, then you're with somebody else who is also figuring it out, and then you have the outside pressure. And I know like that's the same similar for me and my partner. I'm figuring out who I am as a person, but it's just a whole other level, and a whole like it's just so important for people to just I just don't know how you don't empathize, and not in a way that's like trying to provoke like sympathy and like, oh, poor you, but just in a way of like, I don't know, don't judge. Stop judging.
Yeah.
Judgmental
Well,
then.
it's that conversation where you have to say, like, you have to separate your own experiences from another person's. And when it comes to LGBT community, I say you got to put on the rainbow glasses, and you have to see that this small part of their identity, because it is a small part, it's very
Right.
valid, beautiful part, but that one part can influence so many things. And if you are not in the queer community, you don't have to think about that small part. And that's just another added layer to the complexity of someone's life. And maybe it comes down to talking about your privilege for not having to have to deal with that, or maybe it comes down to uh like it's just one of those things where it's just like the experience is different, and you have to admit that. I don't know.
Yeah.
And then all that. And then also on the other side of things too, within the queer community, there's people that don't want to have a relationship. And then that gets a whole other thing where people are like, how could you not want that? That's like our society is based off them. I'm like, well, I just want to have a dog and a roommate. Like, yes. So there's
Um,
a lot that goes into that, right? Where we just have to validate where people land and be like, all right.
but I think that that's such a valid point to make, because I think a lot of people with when it comes to having these conversations, like as of late, most of the conversations I've been having are about pronouns, like you brought up, like just about navigating that space. And it's like, it does, a lot of people bring up like there seems to be it's so complex that it's like, I'm just not going to do anything. It's like some people want us to call our pronouns, some people want us to ask, some people don't, some people are offended. Like there's just, and it's like people, and so it's there's so many complexities, and people are like, well, if it's not an easy like we're going to call everybody by their pronouns, this is how we're going to act, like the box again. It's like, well, it's not worth the conversation. And it's just like, I'm going to challenge that logic, because humans are complex. This is going to be complex when we talk about, just like right now talking about relationship dynamics. It's not a one size fits all. It just isn't. And even though we're talking about a group, a community, every individual within the community is unique. And so it's every conversation is going to be different. And if you're going to be a true ally, you got to be willing to have the complex conversation, right? Not just a one size fits all.
Oh yeah. It's just get your assumptions, just leave the assumptions and let people bring their whole selves to you. And
Yeah.
that's the way. And maybe they don't want to share everything. That's awesome. Good for them. Everyone's entitled to that. So just validate what they do bring to you. Um, and vice versa. Hopefully they also validate your experience, all those kind of things.
Yeah. Well, we only have like 1 minute left. My goodness, we could do like 100 of these.
I
Um,
know.
but I always like to finish these conversations by asking if there's just one takeaway message from this conversation you want people to have, which we crammed a bunch of good information into this, but what would you want it to be?
Oh, I think, and I thought about this when you sent the questions and everything. Like, I'm just like, oh gosh, there's so much. I think at the end of the day, I think my biggest thing is be open. And even if you have these things of like, no, this is the way things are, this is what I believe, take a second and just look at it from a different angle. Be open to people's stories, experiences, believe them, always believe them. Um, and just be open. I think is the biggest thing. And it's okay if you mess up. You just try again. Yeah, I don't know. I'll just leave it there.
Perfect. Tell people how they can contact you if they have questions or want to connect.
Yeah, so easiest way to get a hold of me is my email. I do have a million emails, so if I don't get back to you right away, don't worry, I have it. My email, macy.keith@usu.edu. But then also you can connect me through social media, uh, whatever you like, I guess. But the easiest simple way is even if you want to email me and be like, hey, I'd love to have a conversation, we can easily talk on the phone, do Zoom meetings, those kind of things. So I'm always open to having conversations and just chatting just like this. And I wish people took advantage of that more because I have so much knowledge to give.
I know. That's why I'm doing this series, is because I have so many informal conversations with people on campus. And I'm like, we need to hone in on this and share this knowledge. So hopefully people do reach out to you. You are such an incredible value to our campus community. And I wish there were 1,000 of you on our campus,
Me too.
but at the same time, there is only one Macy Keith. Thank you so much for your time. I do want to just quickly mention, if anybody is wanting to get in touch with SAAVI or myself, the best way is to also email us, just SAAVI, SAAVI @usu.edu. And we can connect you with services, or we can also, they'll get you connected to me directly. So thank you so much. This is perfect. Let me get my dog. This will be a sign off from the top. Everybody have a wonderful week.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.
Good boy.